The first time I saw it, I thought I'd been robbed by a bridal magazine. A full-sized white gazebo, complete with flowing curtains, a crystal chandelier, and pastel cushions, had magically appeared overnight, right in the middle of my pasture. There were even solar fairy lights twinkling as if mocking me for daring to sleep through its arrival. But the real kicker? Sitting cross-legged inside this monstrosity, sipping cucumber water like she was queen of the countryside, was Karen. Not a Karen. The Karen. HOA board member, subdivision menace, and self-declared neighborhood ambassador for all things pretentious. And when I walked up to ask why a miniature wedding chapel had sprouted on my private land, she looked me dead in the eye and said, oh so sweetly, it's just a few feet onto your property. You weren't using it anyway. That was the moment I knew. I wasn't dealing with someone who made a mistake. I was dealing with someone who had a death wish for peace and quiet. And I was about to deliver. The morning had started like any other on my modest patch of farmland just outside the suburb where Karen and her minions resided. I'd made my coffee, fed the chickens, and stepped outside with my boots barely laced when I saw it, the structure gleaming in the early light like a shrine to entitlement. At first, I assumed someone got lost, or maybe a wedding planner took a wrong turn. Then I saw the banner. It read Karen's Retreat in swooping gold letters, and my stomach flipped. I knew exactly what was going on. Karen had always had a way of pretending the rules didn't apply to her. She once argued with a school bus driver for parking near her driveway. Another time, she tried to ban porch swings in the entire subdivision because they were too casual. But this was new territory. Literal territory. Mine. I walked over, incredulous, ducking under sheer curtains that smelled like lavender oil and injustice. Karen sat there with a smug smile, wearing a sun hat that could have doubled as a sail. She looked up from her book, something about moon energy, I'm sure, and greeted me like I was interrupting a sacred meditation. I asked her, in the calmest tone I could muster, what exactly she thought she was doing on my land. She didn't miss a beat. She launched into a ramble about how she needed a space for her women's circle, how her backyard lacked the spiritual openness of my pasture, and how she felt drawn to this particular spot. I didn't say anything at first. I just pointed at the survey marker a few feet away and said, "That's the line. This is my side. That's yours. You're on mine." She sipped her cucumber water. She actually sipped it. Then she gave me a tight little smile and said, "Oh, don't be so territorial, Rick. It's just a few feet. And besides, my uncle used to own this land decades ago. So in a way, it's sort of still in the family." I'm not sure what was more ridiculous, the logic or the confidence. I told her to dismantle the gazebo by sundown. She laughed. Not sarcastically. Like a full, belly-deep laugh that said she didn't think I had the spine to do anything about it. I could have lost it right there. Could have grabbed a chainsaw and gone full tornado on her precious throw pillows. But I didn't. Because I knew something she didn't. Karen liked to think the HOA gave her power. She didn't realize the law didn't end at her backyard. And I'd made it my business over the years to know my property lines better than my own reflection. So I walked away. Calm, collected, and smiling, because if Karen wanted to treat my land like her backyard, then she was about to get the full farm experience. Later that evening, I pulled out my copy of the property deed. Coordinates, elevations, past disputes. I even had drone footage from a few months back when I was testing my new toy. Every frame proved that gazebo was trespassing by nearly 12 feet. That wasn't just a few feet. That was an annexation. I poured myself a cold beer, leaned back in my recliner, and opened up my notebook. I wrote down one word at the top, pigs. You see, my uncle used to raise hogs right near that part of the field. The soil was still nutrient-rich, and I had always meant to get back into it. Now I had the perfect reason. If Karen wanted her little slice of serenity, she could enjoy it with 5 squealing, mud-loving roommates. The next I didn't say a word. I just went about my business, But I did make sure she saw me walking the property line with a measuring tape and 2 stakes. I hammered one in right at the boundary. The other went exactly where her gazebo's front legs stood. When she asked what I was doing, I smiled and said, just making some plans. Big changes coming. That night, I ordered lumber, troughs, and a new fence gate. I called up my brother, who did light contracting, and told him I had a job that needed flair and a sense of poetic justice. He was in by the time I finished the sentence. Over the next few days, Karen started hosting what I can only describe as passive-aggressive picnic. Loud music, scented candles, even a dog that wore sunglasses. Each day I pretended not to notice, even as her guests took selfies and waved at me like they were on safari. I waved back. Then I marked off more land with neon RP. I went down to the county office and applied for a small-scale livestock shelter permit. It was like Christmas came early. The clerk, a guy named Doug, raised an eyebrow when he saw the location on the form. Then he chuckled and said, "You building something on that property line, Rick?" I told him I was building justice. He stamped the form and said, "Good." Karen tried to fine my sister once for painting her mailbox blue. Everything was falling into place. Karen still hadn't moved the gazebo. I wasn't surprised. Entitlement is heavy, and it makes moving furniture feel impossible. That's fine. The pigs would do the moving for her. Or at the very least, make her wish she had. The final piece of the puzzle was delivery. I contacted a local breeder and arranged for 5 young pigs to arrive by the weekend. Mozarta, the largest, had a personality bigger than Karen's sun hat. The others were just as spirited. By the time I introduced them to their new home, the gazebo was about to become the noisiest spa in town. Karen had no idea what was coming. But by the time she did, it would be too late to undo it. Because she built a gazebo on my land without permission. And I was about to show her what happens when you mess with a man who knows the law, owns pigs, and has infinite patience. The days that followed were a strange blend of quiet preparation and public theater. Karen, oblivious to the storm gathering right beneath her wicker chair, continued to treat the gazebo like her own private sanctuary. Her tea parties grew in frequency, and her smugness inflated with each passing event. One afternoon, she actually had the gall to install wind chimes and hang bird feeders, as if the gazebo was some enchanted part of her backyard. It wasn't even just her anymore. Members of the HOA began using the spot as their unofficial meeting area. Folding chairs appeared. Clipboards. There was even talk of hosting a summer yoga retreat. Meanwhile, I kept my mouth shut and focused on logistics. My brother, Clay, had arrived with his toolkit and dry humor in tow. The moment he saw the gazebo, he just whistled and said, "She built that on your land? Oh man, this is going to be fun." We got to work on a discreet fencing system. The plan was to segment off the area around the gazebo without causing immediate suspicion. The pigs, scheduled to arrive in just a few days, needed a secure space. Karen might have decorated the place like a garden wedding venue, but soon it would be the backdrop of squeals, grunts, and glorious chaos. Clay and I dug post holes in the early morning before Karen's crowd arrived, then covered the work with loose hay and a few well-placed tarp. She noticed once or twice but didn't seem to connect the dots. When she asked what we were doing, I shrugged and said, "Trying something new. Earth therapy." She nodded, probably thinking I'd finally been converted by her essential oil pamphlet. But while she was meditating and arranging tea flowers, I was preparing my paperwork. One thing I'd learned over the years was that petty people hate logic, but authorities love it. I double-checked my property deed. I printed out copies of satellite images. I even highlighted survey coordinates in fluorescent green. Then I dropped them off at the county records office. It wasn't just about winning some petty battle. I wanted this airtight. Karen wasn't going to be able to talk her way out of this like she did when she got out of that HOA speeding ticket by claiming her chakras were misaligned. No, this time she'd face real consequences. And then the HOA letter. Delivered in a stark white envelope with a crimson stamp, It was addressed to me with exaggerated formality. The contents were ridiculous. They accused me of causing intentional emotional distress through environmental hostility. They claimed my actions, digging, hammering, installing fencing, were in violation of HOA Code subsection 14b, neighborly conduct. It went on to state that I was creating an aesthetic disruption, visible from subdivision property, and demanded I cease and desist immediately. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my coffee. The best part was the emergency board signature, at the bottom, signed by none other than Karen herself. I drove over to the HOA office and handed them a response. It included a copy of my land deed, official survey records, and the permit I had just received for livestock shelter installation. I even attached a nice little letter addressed to Karen, which read, "Thank you for your gazebo donation. It will serve my animals well. Please inform your guests they may want to wear boots next time." The clerk at the desk, a woman named Brenda, tried not to laugh. "You know she's going to lose her mind, right?" she said. I replied, "Good. Then she might finally find some sense." By now, Karen had begun to notice changes. The fencing posts had become more defined. The ground was flattened and cleared. Water lines were installed. She asked me again, more directly this time, what I was doing. I told her the truth, getting ready for my pigs. Her mouth dropped open, as if I'd just confessed to building a nuclear reactor next to her herb garden. She asked if I was joking. I said, "Karen, you built a gazebo on a working farm. You thought you were squatting in paradise. But you actually set up shop right in the future home of the County Bacon Festival." She threatened to call the sheriff. I told her I'd be happy to call him myself, considering I had legal documentation proving her structure was trespassing. That seemed to stun her into silence, for a little while. 2 days later, I saw her pacing outside with a phone pressed to her ear and a face as red as a tomato in August. It didn't matter. The pigs were already on their way. On delivery day, Clay and I prepared early. We widened the entry gate, set up a temporary corral, and made sure everything was piglet ready. A few neighbors peered over the fence, trying to make sense of what was happening. I just smiled and nodded. The truck arrived right on schedule. 5 little pigs, full of spirit and squeal, trotted into the pen like they'd just been handed keys to the castle. One especially bold piglet immediately charged toward the gazebo and started snuffling at the lace curtain. I named him Harold. Karen came out mid-morning, sipping tea as usual, only to be greeted by the sight of pigs rolling joyfully in the mud around her gazebo. Her shriek pierced the sky like a fire alarm. She stormed across the grass and demanded I remove the animals immediately. I asked why. She said, "Because it's disgusting. This is a place of serenity." I replied, "It's a pig shelter now. I've got permits. You're welcome to visit, but you might want to bring nose plugs." That was the moment everything shifted. She realized, possibly for the first time, that she had no control here. Not over me. Not over the gazebo. Not over the animals who had suddenly claimed her sacred space as their mud-wrestling arena. One of the pigs had already started chewing on the fringe of her decorative carpet. She stomped back to her subdivision, seething, but I knew it wasn't over yet. Karen didn't believe in losing. She believed in escalating. And sure enough, later that day, I received another letter, this one threatening legal action. But I was ready. I forwarded it straight to my lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Grace, who once shut down a developer for mislabeling wetland boundaries. She sent Karen a letter that was simultaneously a legal document and a slap in the face. It included land deeds, permit approvals, and a warning that continued harassment would be met with counteraction. Karen went quiet for the rest of the day. But the HOA? Oh, they were just warming up. The next morning, a group of board members showed up at the edge of my property, staring at the pigs like they were planning a battle. They whispered among themselves and then tried to serve me with another violation notice. This time, I didn't even open it. I handed it back and said, "You're on private land. I don't answer to HOA fantasies. Take it up with the pigs. Harold oinked for emphasis. What none of them knew was that this was only phase 1. Karen had tried to claim land that didn't belong to her. Now I had claimed the narrative. And the next few days would turn her quaint little gazebo into something she could never have imagined. She wanted a retreat. She got a revolution. And the pigs were just getting started. It was almost poetic how quickly the transformation took hold. Within 2 days of the pigs moving in, the once picture-perfect gazebo looked like it had hosted a rock concert for muddy toddlers. Karen's delicate curtains now hung in tatters, partially chewed and streaked with mysterious brown patches. The elegant cushions she'd lovingly arranged had been turned into chew toys and dragged through mud puddles. The chandelier, yes, a real chandelier she'd somehow mounted, was tilted to one side, having fallen victim to one of the pigs attempting a vertical leap. The pigs, however, were thriving. Mozarta, the largest of the group and rapidly becoming the ringleader, had claimed the entire central seating area as her throne. She'd burrowed a crater just beneath the gazebo floorboards and would occasionally pop up like a jack-in-the-box, snorting at anyone who came near. Clay and I stood back and observed the chaos with quiet satisfaction. Every grunted oink and tail wiggle was a little victory. But the best part? It was all perfectly legal. I had the permit nailed to a wooden stake right next to the gate, in full view of anyone who dared question my choices. The pigs weren't just livestock. They were proof that no matter how smug Karen acted, the land didn't lie. She had crossed a boundary, both figuratively and literally, and now her little clubhouse was a 5-star mud buffet. That morning, a new face arrived on the property. A county inspector named Alston, clipboard in hand, boots thick with dried clay, walked the perimeter with a slow, deliberate pace. Karen had apparently filed some kind of complaint accusing me of environmental contamination, which was rich considering she'd dumped lavender potpourri and soap water into my soil for the past 2 weeks. Alston approached me at the fence line. He introduced himself, scanned the enclosure, and raised an eyebrow. So, Karen's retreat is now a pigpen. I nodded. It's an adaptive reuse project. He chuckled, flipping through his note. She said you were operating an unregistered animal facility. I pointed at the permit, still flapping lightly in the wind beside the trough. Registered. Approved. County sanctioned. You're welcome to double-check. He did. And after a few more steps, a few questions about sanitation, and a brief inspection of the pig's water source, Alston gave a nod of approval and said, "Everything's in order. Though I'm guessing Karen's not going to like that." I smiled. "I count on it." Sure enough, Karen emerged shortly after, dressed head to toe in what looked like safari gear, complete with a wide-brimmed hat and sunglasses that made her look like she was preparing to enter Jurassic Park. She approached Alston like he was her savior. He, however, had zero interest in the drama. She launched into a long speech about how her gazebo had been violated, how I had weaponized livestock, and how the entire situation was a coordinated act of psychological warfare. Alston waited for her to finish, then calmly said, "The structure is built on land that doesn't belong to you. And the animals are housed legally with full permit. There's nothing we can do." Karen's face twisted in disbelief. "But it's my gazebo," she shouted. "It's my retreat." He gave a slow shake of the head. "It's his property. That means it's his gazebo now." I thought she was going to faint. She stood there in stunned silence while Mozarta sauntered over and gave her a long, wet snort. Karen backed away like the pig was radioactive. When Alston left, Karen lingered for a while at the edge of the field, muttering to herself and glaring at every oink. That night, Clay and I added the finishing touches. We replaced the shredded curtain rods with sturdy wooden beams, mounted a water dispenser, and installed a small solar panel to keep the enclosure warm during cold nights. We weren't just making a point anymore. We were building something sustainable. Karen had given me a gazebo. I had turned it into a community pig palace. The next few days were quieter, though tension still lingered like smoke. Karen stopped bringing her HOA guests around, likely too embarrassed to explain why pigs were lounging where her tea parties used to take place. But she wasn't done. No, the next wave of retaliation came in the form of psychological warfare. At 6:03 a.m. the following morning, I was jolted awake by what sounded like a violin being attacked by a lawnmower. Karen had installed massive outdoor speakers on the edge of her property, pointed directly at mine. Classical music blasted through the air with the subtlety of a thunderstorm. Vivaldi, Tchaikovsky, Wagner. And it didn't stop. It went on for hours. Karen must have thought the pigs would go mad, or I'd come crawling to her begging for peace. Instead, something unexpected happened. Mozarta started dancing. It began with a head bob, then a tail twitch. And soon enough, she was doing this weird, rhythmic shuffle that looked uncannily like she was grooving to the beat. The other pigs followed her lead. Before long, we had what looked like a farmyard flash mob happening right in the gazebo turnpin. Karen had turned my pigs into performers. Neighbors started noticing. One woman from the subdivision pulled over on the side of the road just to watch. Then came another. Soon, someone posted a video online titled, "Dancing Pig at Karen's Gazebo." It blew up. Over 70,000 views in 2 days. I started getting messages from people asking if they could visit the farm. One guy wanted to hire Mozarta for a birthday party. Another asked if she was available for a commercial shoot. Karen's plan had backfired harder than ever. Her attempt at noise harassment had made my pigs into internet celebrities. And the kicker? I started receiving donations from animal lovers online. People loved the idea of repurposing Karen's gazebo into a shelter for happy pig. One woman even sent a care package of hand-sewn blankets and treat. Mozarta, naturally, chose the loudest one to drag through the mud. But with all this new attention came pressure. Karen wasn't just embarrassed anymore, she was furious. She cornered me at the edge of the fence and demanded that I stop exploiting her pain. I reminded her that she had built the gazebo on land she didn't own, refused to remove it, and then called the authorities on me when I used it. She huffed and shouted that I was profiting from her aesthetics. I just pointed at the pigs and said, "They seem happy. And they don't charge rent." It was clear by now that Karen was in too deep. She couldn't admit fault because doing so would be the ultimate surrender. She couldn't remove the gazebo because it wasn't hers to move. And she couldn't shut down the pig shelter because it was completely within legal bounds. Every card she played only made things worse for her. What she didn't know was that I had more cards up my sleeve. The media attention was nice, but I had one final twist planned. Something public. Something poetic. Something Karen would never be able to live down. She thought the dancing pigs were the climax. But the real show hadn't even started. Because if you're going to steal someone's land and plant your gazebo on it, you better be ready for what grows out of it. And in this case, what grew out of Karen's ego was a fully operational pig sanctuary with a fan base, a donation stream, and a front-row seat to the most ironic revenge she'd ever experienced. She had wanted a retreat. What she got was a revolution. And we were just getting warmed up. The quiet before the next storm lasted exactly 2 days. By now, Karen had retreated into a kind of fuming silence, avoiding eye contact and stopping her daily marches to the gazebo's perimeter. But that didn't mean she was giving up. No, Karen was the type to smile at your door while calling the fire department on your grill. When she finally acted again, it was with the full force of the HOA behind her, which, for her, probably felt like wielding a government agency. A bright red notice was nailed to my front fence, the same fence that now featured a pig-shaped weather vane spinning happily in the breeze. The notice read, "Cease and desist order from the Oakview Meadows Homeowners Association." Underneath was a long list of vague accusations: noise pollution, unsanitary conditions, unauthorized commercial activity, and public nuisance violations. It ended with a threat of a $10,000 fine if the so-called violations weren't addressed within 72 hours. I read the whole thing twice, then laughed so hard I had to sit down on a hay bale to breathe. The problem for Karen and her HOA squad was that none of their authority extended to my property. My land wasn't part of Oakview Meadows, never had been. It sat on the edge of the community, predating it by almost 5 decades. The line was clean and legal. Their rules stopped where my grass started. But they had tried to stretch their little fiefdom into a full-blown kingdom, and now they were running into reality. Still, just to make it official, I made a trip to the county records office and had the boundaries reviewed again. The clerk, the same one from earlier, rolled his eyes when he saw the HOA letter. He made a few calls, printed out a fresh confirmation map, and said, "If they come onto your land again trying to enforce this nonsense, call the sheriff." That same DY, I crafted a response. Not just a legal one, an educational one. I stapled a laminated copy of my property deed and a blown-up version of the legal boundary survey directly onto the pig shelter fence. Then I added a handmade wooden sign that read, "HOA Free Zone. Trespassers will be educated or hugged by pigs." It was positioned perfectly to be visible from Karen's upstairs window. I know she saw it because within hours, I received a new complaint via email from the HOA Legal Committee, this time accusing me of mockery and hostile signage. I was still chuckling when Clay pulled into the driveway with a trailer of fresh hay and a custom-built pig ramp. He'd been helping not just with fencing and feeding systems, but with upgrade. By now, the structure formerly known as Karen's Retreat had solar-powered fans, reinforced flooring, and a small decorative porch. Mozarta and the others treated it like a 5-star piggy spa. One morning, I caught 2 of them sunbathing on top of a hay pile while the others splashed in the mud pool. The gazebo roof provided perfect shade, and I couldn't help but think, Karen really knew how to pick a good foundation, too bad it was on the wrong land. That weekend, the HOA made their boldest move yet. I was working in the barn when I heard the sound of an approaching crowd, footsteps, murmuring, and a distinct shuffling of pamphlets. I stepped outside to find an entire troop of HOA board members standing at my fence. Karen was front and center, flanked by 2 clipboard-carrying men and a woman with a whistle around her neck, like she was managing a suburban boot camp. They had lawn chairs, folding tables, and even a banner that read, "Oakview Order, Protecting Community Standards." I walked up to the fence, arms crossed, waiting for them to speak. Karen cleared her throat. "We are here today to formally inspect your operation and issue citations for the ongoing violations." I raised an eyebrow. "You mean my pig shelter? The one with full county permits? On my private land?" One of the clipboard guys stepped forward. "You've created a spectacle that is drawing attention to our community and affecting property values. We have the right to address nuisances under Article 6C. I pointed to the sign. "And I have the right to not be bullied by a group pretending to have power outside their borders." Karen's eyes narrowed. "We're calling the sheriff. You're leaving us no choice." "Please do," I said, smiling. "I already spoke with him. He'll be thrilled to learn you're escalating this." True to form, they did call. An hour later, a deputy sheriff pulled up. I knew him. Josh, a good-natured guy who had grown up a few towns over. He took one look at the scene. Karen's HOA circus on one side, pigs peacefully munching on the other, and sighed. He spoke to me first. "They really trying this again?" I nodded. "They're on my land again, too." Josh turned to the HOA group. "This is a civil matter, not criminal. The property line has already been confirmed. You have no authority here. If you continue harassing this man or entering his land, you could be facing trespassing charges." Karen gasped like she'd been slapped. "You're taking his side?" Josh didn't miss a beat. "I'm taking the law's side. You're done here. Go home." With that, the whole group began to pack up, muttering as they retreated in defeat. Karen, however, lingered just long enough to deliver one final line over her shoulder. "You'll regret this. You've made a powerful enemy." I watched her walk away and replied loud enough for everyone to hear, You made yourself powerless the moment you built your ego shack on my land. In the days that followed, something interesting happened. The neighborhood started turning on Karen. Apparently, word had spread about how she dragged the HOA into her personal vendetta, cost them time and legal headaches, and embarrassed the board publicly. I heard whispers that a recall vote was underway. Some members even stopped me in town to apologize for her behavior, insisting they never signed off on any of the notices. One elderly couple brought me a basket of fresh muffins and a note that read, "Thanks for defending your land and your pigs. Oakview isn't all bad." Meanwhile, my pigs continued to enjoy their upgraded lives. I started letting school kids visit for free on weekends. Parents loved the educational aspect, and the kids loved Mozarta's antic. A few local reporters picked up the story, dubbing the shelter Karen's Pig Palace. Karen's name, ironically, had become a symbol of exactly the kind of arrogance people were sick of. She couldn't show her face without hearing snickers. At a community barbecue, someone even wore a shirt with a pig lounging under a gazebo, holding a teacup. But I wasn't done. There was one final thing to handle: the gazebo itself. Despite all the chaos, I had left it largely intact, mostly because it served as the centerpiece for the pig shelter. But it needed a final touch. Clay and I built a sign, sturdy, hand-painted, and mounted right above the entrance. It read, "Karen's Pig Palace EST. This year, thanks to unauthorized construction." Underneath, a smaller plaque read, "Now serving justice with a side of oink." The sign went viral within hours. Photos of it spread across social media. Tourists started showing up. Someone even offered to shoot a short documentary. Karen's attempt to dominate my land had turned into a county-wide joke, and a triumph of pettiness wrapped in pure logic. She had thrown everything she could at me: HOA threats, public embarrassment, noise pollution, and even legal escalation. But in the end, it was all her own doing. She'd crossed a line she didn't own, and I simply let her drown in the mud she created. Now she had to live in a world where her name was forever attached to a pig shelter. And I got to enjoy the peace, the pigs, and the satisfaction of building something lasting out of her blunder. What started as trespass ended as transformation. And she was the only one who didn't see it coming. Summer rolled in with a thick haze of humidity and the kind of heat that made everything slow down, except the story that had taken on a life of its own. What started as a petty land dispute had snowballed into a local spectacle, a cautionary tale, and somehow, a viral internet sensation. Karen's Gazebo, now fully transformed into a pig haven, had become a landmark. Parents drove in from neighboring counties to let their kids feed Mozarta and her 4 companions. School groups scheduled weekend field trip. A local bakery even released a limited edition cookie shaped like a gazebo with little icing pigs on the roof. I didn't plan for any of this. I just wanted my land back and maybe a little peace. Instead, I got a front row seat to watching karma unfold on a scale that felt almost theatrical. Karen, meanwhile, had vanished from public view. Her SUV hadn't been seen outside her house in days, and rumor had it she'd deleted all her social media accounts. The HOA had finally had enough and voted to remove her from her board position. One of the members, a retired dentist named Marvin, told me she tried to argue her case by calling me a vengeful pig overlord with cult influence. He said half the room laughed before she stormed out. The rest voted to strip her of her title on the spot. With her fall from grace came an eerie silence. No letters, no threats, no visits. It should have felt like victory, but part of me knew Karen wasn't the type to just give up. She was retreating, not surrendering. Clay and I took advantage of the lull to complete the final renovations on the shelter. We added a second shaded pen for the warmer months and even painted the gazebo's columns in cheerful pastel colors. Visitors loved it. Kids took photos. Elderly couples chuckled at the plaque. But the most surprising development came when a representative from a regional animal welfare group reached out to nominate Karen's Pig Palace for a Community Recognition Award. They liked that the shelter was educational, clean, and open to the public. I nearly fell out of my chair reading that email. It felt like the universe had just winked at me. The awards ceremony was set for a Saturday afternoon, right at the property line. We didn't want anything extravagant, just a podium, a few folding chairs, and a small covered table with lemonade and cookies. But word had spread, and before long, people from all around town started arriving. Reporters, bloggers, curious locals. Even the mayor showed up in sunglasses, holding a donation check and a half-eaten snickerdoodle. Mozarta trotted around in a red ribbon like she owned the place, which, to be fair, she sort of did. I stood at the makeshift podium and gave a short speech. Nothing fancy. Just a thank you to the volunteers, a few jokes about Karen's contribution, and a reminder that you don't need to fight fire with fire when mud works just fine. The crowd laughed and clapped. Cameras clicked. Pigs squealed happily. And for a moment, everything felt settled. Then, just as we were wrapping up, a familiar voice cut through the crowd like a fork dragging across a plate. Karen was back. She pushed through the chairs with wild hair, oversized sunglasses, and an expression that could curdle fresh milk. She wasn't dressed for the occasion, more like someone halfway between a courtroom meltdown and a grocery store tantrum. Her voice trembled with fury. "You think this is funny? All of you? Turning my gazebo into a joke? Making me a laughingstock?" The crowd fell silent. Even the pigs paused. Karen pointed at me. "You humiliated me. You destroyed something beautiful. This was supposed to be a peaceful place." I took a deep breath, stepped down from the podium, and walked toward her calmly. "Karen," I said, keeping my voice even, "you built that gazebo on my land. You ignored warnings. You used your position to bully and intimidate. And when I did something legal and peaceful in response, you tried to ruin me. But what you actually did was help build something people love." She shook her head violently. "You'll see. One day you'll regret this. This isn't over." I gestured around. "Karen, look. This is the end. This isn't a war. This is just a place for animals, for kids, for the community. You turned it into a symbol of entitlement. I turned it into something that gives back." She opened her mouth to retort, but nothing came out. Not because she didn't have words, she just had no footing left to stand on. Everything she'd built, all the control she thought she had, was gone. She stood there, surrounded by people who used to respect her, now shaking their heads or avoiding her eyes. She'd burned every bridge she ever walked on, and now she was alone on an island of her own design. Karen turned and stormed off, muttering under her breath as she pushed past the mayor, who gave me a look that said, "Well, that was inevitable." The rest of the ceremony resumed awkwardly but recovered quickly. If anything, Karen's meltdown became the final nail in her reputation's coffin. By the end of the afternoon, several parents asked if they could book birthday parties at the shelter. One woman even pitched the idea of making it a nonprofit. The idea sounded crazy at first, but later that night, as Clay and I cleaned up folding chairs and refilled the pig troughs, I started thinking about it seriously. What if something that started from spite turned into something real, something that lasted? Over the next few weeks, donations continued pouring in. Mozarta became a minor celebrity after a local news station aired a segment called From Entitlement to Enclosure: How One Man Built Justice on a Pig's Back. The name was ridiculous, but the coverage brought attention, volunteers, and more importantly, opportunity. By the end of the month, we'd received a small grant from a local agriculture initiative, and I had officially registered the pig shelter as a community learning center. I hadn't seen Karen since the ceremony, but I heard rumors. She put her house up for sale, moved to another town, tried to rebrand herself as a wellness coach but failed spectacularly when someone found a clip of Mozarta chasing her through the mud. She became an internet footnote, a warning, a meme, a reminder that arrogance rarely ends in peace. As for me, I kept my head down and kept building. We added educational signs, more shaded areas, and even a small vegetable garden for visiting kids to learn about sustainability. Every time I looked at that gazebo, I thought back to the day I found it standing there like an invasion, but now it felt like a triumph, a repurposed monument to the power of patience, persistence, and well-timed pigs. I never waned revenge. Not really. What I wanted was respect. Karen tried to take that from me the moment she planted that gazebo without permission. But in trying to dominate, she lost everything. I didn't shout or threaten or escalate with hate. I just let the pigs do the talking. And they said more with snorts and snuffles than any HOA board meeting ever could. The sun dipped low over the pasture as I closed the gate and watched Mozarta and her crew settle in for the evening. I smiled, tipped my hat, and walked back toward the house. The land was quiet again. Not the silence of retreat, but the peace of resolution. Karen had built a gazebo on my land. I turned it into something better. And in the end, that was the sweetest victory of all.